there's an essential contradiction in the story of European imperialism in the end of the 19th century. The two biggest imperial powers, France and Britain, were also the two nations that were, in principle, the most committed to forms of representative government, the rule of law, and yet somehow they found it quite right that they should, through conquest, control a vast portion of the earth. This could only be done through violence, and this was real violence. I mean, just to give one example, historians estimate that 850,000 people died in the conquest of Algeria, a process which took decades, the French conquest of Algeria. How could they justify this? Well, there were various versions of the ideology that was used to justify this. Rudyard Kipling most famously called it the white man's burden, that it was the responsibility of the enlightened nations of Europe to bring the fruits of their superior culture and superior knowledge to other parts of the world. In France, they didn't use a racial term to use it. They called it the civilizing mission, that it was their responsibility, their duty to bring the benefits of French culture and French civilization to other parts of the world. And in principle, this was something that they stood for. The people in the other parts of the world, subjected to colonial rule, would eventually be assimilated into the French Empire and become French. Of course, this was always postponed. It was never quite realized. And in fact, there were strong forces militating against a real assimilation. Just take something simple like economic development. It was very hard for the Ministry of Colonies to advocate industrial development in the colonies because it was destabilizing for all sorts of reasons. First of all, domestic industries didn't want the competition. They wanted to see the colonies as a source of raw materials. And there was also great fear that industrial development in the colonies in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries would lead to the production of a more radical workforce who would be open to all sorts of propaganda from the communists, et cetera. So there were strong interests militating against the actual economic development of the colonies. Ultimately, of course, the civilizing mission and the white man's burden failed in its promise. And the end result was the reassertion of movements of national independence in the aftermath of the Second World War.